Hey, 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 soul sister. We're back for another episode, and I'm thrilled to have a dear friend of mine in the house, Robyn Smith. Good to see you, sister. Good to have you here.
Thank you.
Robyn was actually on my podcast, a while ago, talking about communication, and it rocked. And we've been friends for years. And one of the things I know about Robyn is she knows a lot about trauma and healing trauma and how this can affect relationships. So we will be diving into how trauma may be affecting your ability to connect in love and relationships. And let me tell you a little bit about my sweet friend, Robyn. She is an award-winning speaker, a leading trauma and relationship coach for women, and founder of the Rock Your Relationship movement. Inspired by her own thriving 21-year relationship with her husband, she is helping thousands of women transform from frustrated to fulfilled by creating deeper, loving, and conscious connections for greater life satisfaction and happiness. So good. I love what you do.
Thank you.
Such great work in the world. And Robyn, I know you're helping clients unwind layers of complex trauma and dysfunctional patterns that have interfered with their ability to really enjoy their life and have that ease and harmony in their relationships. And it's not that it's just about their partnerships, but their relationships to themselves, so they can feel happy, connected, and whole. And that's why I love your work, because all of these pieces are so important. So thank you for being here today.
My absolute pleasure. It's an honor.
Yay. And I'm so happy to have you as my friend. So I would actually like to just start with the difference. Like, how do you distinguish between relational and complex trauma from shock trauma? Because that's what I think a lot of us think about is like shock trauma. So what are the differences? Can you kind of shed a light on those nuances?
Absolutely. I think it's really important because we do think of trauma, and a lot of people will say, well, I haven't had any trauma. And they'll think of like a car accident or, a surgery that was intense, or being abused physically or sexually. And so those are traumatic events. Absolutely. But they're more considered shock trauma. And a shock trauma is when you're in shock and something, happens that is very upsetting to your system. And it's usually a one-time event. So it's not happening consistently over time. So whereas a complex trauma is happening long-term, it's like repeated. Say you live in a war zone, you're constantly being bombarded with, bombs falling and people fighting, or, if you're growing up in an environment where there are people fighting, or where somebody is consistently sick, those are more complex trauma. And relational trauma is more when that trauma happens inside of a relationship. So whereas the environment of the war zone is not a relationship as much as, if you're being abused, if you're being neglected, if your mother's in bed and you're her caretaker when you're supposed to be able to be out and playing, or, so many things that happen in our childhood, especially, can create can be considered trauma, and then therefore affect how we show up later in life in our adult relationships.
Yep. And as you're sharing that, I'm like listing all my traumas, I'm just like, well, my dad died when I was 14. That was like huge trauma, huge loss, and totally affected how I approached intimacy and trust with people sticking around. And even just what I might think of as minor trauma, as you were talking, I'm like, I remember being on the playground when I was in 4th grade, and like 5 or 6 girls pinned me up against the wall and were bullying me. And then I had to go to the guidance counselor, like as if I was the victim, and yet I had to go to the guidance counselor. And then everybody knew that I was picked on. And that laid down a lot of trauma around safety in groups and safety with women, girls at the time, but safety with other people. So yeah, as we're talking just there, I was thinking about these little things, well, not little when my dad died, but things that happened that really set me up for some patterns in relationships. So I'm really excited to be talking about this huge thing, because women are struggling, you know, when it comes to dating and relationships. They're struggling in midlife to be able to have that healthy connection that's rooted in early trauma. So can you give, in addition to the things I just said, like, what are some other things that could get in the way of them really opening up their heart and trusting the people that they're dating and wanting to dive deeper with?
Yeah. So outside of like the whole dating situation, which I know you talk about and how difficult that is on its own.
Yes.
You know, your example is a really good one where a parent dies at a young age, and then you have this feeling of not trusting someone's going to be there for you. And it could also look like an early divorce, which is what happened in my life. My just brief example, my parents first went on a trip without me and my brother when I was under 6 months old. So I had to get weaned at 5 months or whatever. And then they were gone for 2 weeks. And so there's a real break in the bond, you know, in the familiarity of like what connection is. And so any infant in that situation would feel, you know, what any child does with that is they interpret, whether they are pre-verbal or, you know, have words, is they interpret that as it's my fault. There must be something wrong with me. So if your parent dies, if your parents are arguing, if your brother's sick, if you are the middle child and not getting enough attention, you know, if somebody's getting a lot of attention and you're getting negative attention because you keep, you know, messing up or whatever, or if your parents have really harsh rules. My client said the other day that children should not ever make a mistake. So if you make a mistake, you're punished. So anything like that, you know, is going to, what a child will do with that is decide there must be something wrong with me. I'm not lovable. I'm not worthy of love. I'm a problem. I'm bad. And there sets up a shame cycle. So those are some examples. I think you're asking examples of what could have happened or how it might show up now, because I can give, I think we're talking about.
Well, both, but let me piggyback on what you just said, because this, what did I do wrong? I mean, that happens so often when people are dating, you know, when it goes sideways or somebody disappears. It's like they start to obsess a lot of times, you know, and they start to, especially women, start to like talk to all their girlfriends. Did I do too much? Did I say too much? Did I do something wrong? And then in relationships with codependencies, you know, being really careful, being, you know, walking on eggshells because we don't want to be bad. And then the flip side, and I know for me, is I better be good. I better watch out. Otherwise, I'll be abandoned like I was when my dad died. Now I've worked it and I need to be conscious of it because it's, you know, it's something that is so deep inside of me. So yeah, so these are some of the themes that the women are struggling with.
Yeah, so exactly that. So when you have these early situations where you feel bad or wrong or unlovable, you carry that forward into every relationship forevermore. So, and if you didn't get the connection that you needed, if your parents were too busy working or too busy parenting 7 other kids, or, you know, or they were always angry, you know, you take that in as, again, your fault, something wrong with me. And then you have a survival strategy from that. And your survival strategy might be, I better be good, so I get liked and I don't get abandoned, or I better be quiet so I don't get punished and hurt, or I better be super special and show how talented I am and let everybody know I'm awesome. So we have all these survival strategies that we make up based on our childhood experience that then also shows up in the relationship. So you mentioned like some insecurities that women have, and that, you know, that can often be from the situations we're talking about, not feeling good enough, feeling there's something wrong with me, not feeling confident, and then just looking outside for approval about that, thinking I did something wrong and that's why, as if nobody else could have done that same thing. You know, taking things too personally is another thing. So those are some examples, and taking things like, you know, back to that core wound of I must not be lovable or he would have stuck around.
Yeah.
Right. Not good enough. He's going to find somebody better. And it's so painful to go there. and to believe that. And so, you know, that's the piece that we need to address to move
Yeah.
forward.
Exactly, because then people are just jumping through hoops and trying to make sure that they don't have that same wounding again. Of course, it's creating a whole different dynamic. And, you're talking about strategies. Yeah, these are strategies people we pick up so that we don't get hurt. So these patterns run deeply.
Very deep.
And they've happened over and over, hence the word pattern. So like, how do women shift these patterns? I mean, I know as a shadow worker, I have my way. I'm curious, how do you support women in shifting some of these deep-seated, I'm not good enough, I'm going to be abandoned, or any of these patterns?
Yeah. So our work is, somewhat similar, and I do work with parts that show up, and I'm trained to work with what we call developmental trauma and complex trauma, which we've been talking about. Developmental trauma is just any trauma that happens while you're developing, especially the first 5 years of life, that make the biggest impact. So in my work, we look a lot at a few different things. One, your emotional comfort, your like ease with your emotions, your ability to be with them versus stuffing them down or like shooting them out at everybody, or, what we do, how we are in relationship to our emotions. Because when our relationship to our emotions is healthy, we're going to show up in a more healthy way in relationships to others and their emotions. So that's part of being whole, is befriending all of your emotions, even that anger that we have all this judgment about. We work on how to befriend your anger and make peace with that. And another piece of it is your identity and the beliefs that, you've developed that sort of create in your mind who you are and how you're supposed to be and what people think. And that's such core stuff. A lot of us don't even think about that on a daily basis, like what we think of ourselves, who we think ourselves to be. And a lot of that was created from a childhood's perspective, and then added to with like, more proof. See, he said that's reinforcing this belief that's so not even true, but we look for evidence to reinforce what we think. So we do a lot of unwinding of this stuff. And I always think of the ball of thread and, how you have to be careful because that one might be connected to that one. And so we just gingerly pull things apart and unpack the tension that's there. And in my work, it is related to physical tension, because all our identities are what we call psychobiological. So they're in our head and in our body, mind, body. And so we don't just work with the mind and like concepts and your intellect, because that doesn't really get integrated very well. And, anyone can say a wonderful affirmation, but how many people have really changed from affirmations? Not too many. So, because it doesn't go deeply, it's just a cool thought. Yeah, I like that, but it doesn't make an impact. So the work I do is somatic. That's why we work with the body and the body's experience along with the mind. So we get more balance and more integration and really a lot more transformation that way.
Oh, so good. And and as you're sharing, I just want to just speak to that. It takes time, all the things that you were just sharing, the tweezing apart, the thread. It's like there are layers, and it takes time and for everybody to just take a breath into that, because sometimes it's like, oh, I'm going to take this course and I'm going to be all healed, or I'm going to do this one coaching session and I'm going to be all transformed. And it's bite-sized pieces, and over time, and trauma runs deeply. So I love how you shared that. And so we're talking about trauma, and I'm curious your perspective on how that affects a woman's ability to communicate clearly and effectively, because I know that it certainly can have people walking on eggshells. I'm in recovery of that for sure. So
yeah,
tell us more about the connection.
Right. So there's one example, yours walking on eggshells. And so again, if we look back at what we were just speaking about, insecurities, anxiety, attachment issues, looking outside for approval, not being confident, not feeling worthy or lovable, all that stuff's going to affect the lenses you're wearing, right? And how you perceive what's coming at you. So you could take something, you could misinterpret something as therefore he doesn't like me, and then shoot back some anger because of the lenses you're wearing. So they're absolutely intertwined, how you're communicating, and then your emotional experience, your identity experience. So again, for example, if you feel small and not enough, it's easy to feel like maybe you should have your stuff together. That's how I was. So several years ago, before I got into this work as a yoga teacher, which I'm still doing, 28 years later, this is hard for me to believe. I was like kind of a famous yoga teacher in my small community in Northern California. And so everybody knew who I was. And I had this kind of thing, like I have to be a good, rightly, so yoga teacher and show how yogic I am. And so I was actually really insecure and I didn't want people to see it. So I would keep people away and I wouldn't disclose. So that's one example of like trying to show one side of me and therefore shutting down my communication a lot, not being very personal. And then another one might be from an insecure place, taking things too personally. And then, and from that can come blame, complaining, a lot of drama. So if we feel vulnerable because someone sees something that's actually kind of true and we're like, oh, I don't want to show that, then it's a lot easier to express our anger through blame than it is to express our pain of vulnerability. Make sense?
Let's underline that one. It's so much easier for people to point a finger at somebody else than to feel the vulnerability and to own what's going on inside of them. We've not been taught to take that breath and to kind of feel into the ouch. It's more of, you did this to me. And so if there's what I'm hearing you say is when you've had all this trauma, there's going to be that almost, what's that word? That instant reaction. Yeah. It's like, yeah.
Or to just shift into sad when you are actually angry. So and that's a go-to because anger's no. And if you're angry, you're a bitch. So you might, then you cry a lot, and so then you're shutting down the one emotion and overexpressing the other. Another example is, relates to what you do too, is just showing up as the victim. So we were a victim as children. You didn't have power in your life to make choices and choose your parents and choose who you're relating to and like choose what happened to you. You had no power. So you were a victim, but as an adult, you're not a victim and you get to choose. But so often we carry that victimhood forward, like you were saying, and look what you did to me, poor me. So that can really show up in how we communicate. So the blaming, the criticizing are big ones that women get into, and then feeling like a victim and like, needing to, which goes along with complaining, but just feeling small and unworthy and like, not enough. And it affects everything. So I'm curious.
We are all works in progress. We're all hopefully, learning and growing from this life journey. And for this woman who's opening her heart to dating and potentially calling in somebody, if there is trauma, and my opinion is we've all had some version of trauma and some version of inner programming that has us feeling we better be careful on some level, not to mention negative bias and just wanting to survive. Do you have any tips for this woman on how to communicate? Like, if this is all still going on and she's still working it, like what might be a good starting point as she starts to talk to people and she's noticing some of the fear bubbling up and she needs to speak. However, there's all that, I don't want him to think badly of me, or, what might be a good starting point for her?
I got two to offer you today on that. So one is that I think you may have expressed earlier, I was just at a women's circle where this came up for more than one woman too, is that women don't often express what they want and need. And they kind of try to be good and try and be nice and go with what everybody else wants. Sure, I'll be easygoing and go with the flow. But then they're going, I don't want to do this. So two things related to that are, one, really getting in touch with what you need and want, and letting it be okay to express that, because how is anybody supposed to meet you there and honor your needs if they don't know what they are? And that takes sometimes a year of work to get to that place where you can express that, because there might be a lot of trauma around you having needs. So just to say, like you said, be patient with that process. But that's so important on dates too, when you might feel like this isn't safe, or I need more time, I want to go more slowly. And so that goes along with setting clear boundaries. And so it's expressing what you do want on the needs side, and then expressing what you don't want. And that's really important for your integrity, your relationship with yourself. You cross your own boundary, what's going to happen? You're going to be hard on yourself. You're going to be mad at yourself. You're going to give yourself a hard time. I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have said that, so it's so important to, whatever path you take, working with someone like you or with me or whatever journey, to get to know yourself enough to know your needs and boundaries, so you can be really clear about that. And that way you're going to be honored. And if you come across somebody who doesn't know how to honor those things, red flag, ladies. Like, your needs and boundaries are important. And some of us have a lot of those for a while until we do more inner work and we can be more free and easygoing without a problem. But if you just to know that it's okay to have those, and they need to be honored for you to feel good about yourself.
Yeah.
And in a relationship. Yeah.
Again, what was the last thing you said?
Oh, for you to be in a healthy relationship too. Those have to be there.
Yeah. Absolutely. So you have the Rock Your Relationship communication training coming up. Will you share a little bit about that?
Yes, it's a big fun thing that I love to do at least a couple times a year now. And so what we do is it's basically 7 days, actually, with about an hour a day. And I teach simple communication skills that are really about conscious communication, conscious listening, a little bit about emotions and boundaries in there too. So it's juicy. Women get a ton out of it. It's totally free, at least right now. And yeah, every day you get a new skill, and I ask you to implement it as best you can. And then there's prizes. So those who, come back and share their story and communicate about what happened, are eligible for prizes. And I actually give away a big bonus at the end too. It's probably going to be 2 people this time, at least $2,000 worth of prizes to somebody to win a seat, scholarship in one of my programs. So,
oh, wow. That sounds amazing. I know you're an amazing teacher. And communication is key. Oh my God, communication is key. So that sounds great. The Rock Your Relationship communication training. We will put that link in the show notes. And in case the timing doesn't work for you, maybe you're listening to this after it's done, you have a communication checklist, the ultimate communication checklist. Can you tell them what that is? Yeah. And that's for everybody that's listening.
Exactly. It's a really short, like 1-page checklist. Literally, you can read it in two minutes. And I see it as basically like 10 points of communication that are key, and as a guidepost for you to see, am I doing this? Where do I need to grow? So you can check off where you're lined up with that, where you're not. And that shows you, those areas that need some work.
Yes. So I've seen it and it's wonderful.
Yeah. So if you get that, you will find out about the next, communication training if it's coming up.
Oh, that's great. Oh, that's wonderful. So we'll put all of that in the show notes, those 2 links. Robyn, thank you. This is such a huge topic. I love what you're bringing to the table for relationships, and I know you work it and walk your talk. So I'm so glad that you had some time to share today. Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much for having me, Junie. I love the work you're doing.
Thank you. All right, soul sister, that's our episode for today. Seriously, give yourself some spaciousness around this. Trauma does run deeply. It takes time and gentleness. So love yourself up. Put some comments below if you have any questions or comments. I look at everything that's posted. And if you haven't liked or subscribed, what you waiting for? Go do that. Until we meet again, take good care of that precious heart of yours. Mwah.